Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm Bobby Duffy. I'm Director of the Policy Institute at King's College London, and it's a real pleasure to host this webinar on the case for cash. Do cash transfers work in practice? And I am really delighted to be able to chair the discussion, and I think for three main reasons. First is the study itself, which is on such an important issue on helping on homelessness and using such an interesting approach in direct cash transfers. I won't go into the detail of the study or the results as we have Michael, Leisure and Erin to talk about those and their experience of this. But the interest in this is really clear from the study getting picked up in just about all the key media outlets when it was released yesterday. There is a real interest in this. The second reason for me is I'm just delighted that we get to talk about a study that's part of our work for and with the Centre for Homelessness Impact, who commissioned this study and which was funded by the UK government's Evaluation Accelerator Fund. The What Works centres and that serious focus on evaluation and experimental methods in the centre of government is such an important strand. Our mission here at the Policy Institute at King's, which our experimental government team is part of, who ran this study, is to help solve society's problems with evidence and expertise. And this is a key exemplar, I think, of that in practice. And partnerships with What Work centres and forward-looking government initiatives is vital to actually then achieving change. Which relates to the final reason I'm really excited about this one, is that there's so much more to learn and apply these approaches to. Michael may well mention that we'll be setting up a cash lab to explore this more under his brilliant leadership and his real drive for these types of methods and approaches. So I'm sure we'll keep getting more and better approaches as that work develops. But back to this particular study, and we have three of the best people we could have to help us understand how it worked. First, we'll hear from Michael Sanders, who's Professor of Public Policy and Director of the Experimental Government team here at the Policy Institute, who oversaw this study. Then we're really delighted to be able to hear from Erin Hill, who's a second-year university student studying forensic investigation, who was one of the participants involved in the trial, and she'll be sharing her direct experience of it. Then to round off, we've got Dr. Leisure Teixeira, who is CEO of the Centre for Homelessness Impact, and great to hear from Leisure on this. Then we'll have time for Q&A from you, and I do encourage you to get your questions in early using the Q&A function or chat function at the bottom of the screen. And then upvote the questions you would like answered. I'll mostly just be picking the top ones just because it makes my life as chair really easy, but it does reflect what people want answered too. But before we get to that, let's begin straight away with Michael Sanders. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Bobby, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to talk about the results of the trial, and then that'll be contextualized and expanded on by my colleagues. So this is a study of giving cash transfers to care leavers. By way of context for this, young people leaving care experience, not all of them, but many of them experience large numbers of negative outcomes. And that's in part driven by their experiences during childhood, which can't be ignored, and also the abrupt loss of support in many cases at when they leave care around the age of 18. 1 in 4 care leavers will go on to experience homelessness before their 25th birthday. And this is sort of a real part of the moral driver for this research study, is that these are our children, in a sense. They were, to use the jargon, corporately parented by the local authorities they lived in. And ensuring that they thrive not just during childhood, but into adulthood is a really important moral responsibility. They are also disproportionately affected by poor physical and mental health, financial hardship, and involvement in the criminal justice system. So there's a wide range of challenges that we're looking at addressing here. In this trial, we recruited 302 care leavers across 9 local authorities in England, and they were randomized either to receive a £2,000 unconditional cash transfer into their bank account or not to in the control group. Anybody who was randomized to the treatment group and didn't have a bank account was supported to set one up so that nobody was excluded from receiving the transfer. Anybody was able to receive it. We then followed them up at 6 months and 12 months after they've received the money. Although obviously not every single one of them completed the final survey, we have still got good balance. So from a statistical perspective, we can still make robust claims about the impact of the cash transfer. It's important to say this is the first randomized trial of unconditional cash transfers in the UK to be able to produce results like this. So we're really excited to be sharing them with you today. And of course, as Bobby said, there has been a great deal of interest in the press yesterday about this. So many of you may have already heard some of this, but hopefully some of it at least will be new to you. So what did we find? So the first and most important outcome, particularly given our partnership with the Centre for Homelessness Impact, is around housing security. So what we see is a meaningful change in housing security at the 6 month point, and although that does decline by the 12 month point, we're still seeing, non-trivial changes. This is the equivalent of young care leavers being 8 percentage points more likely to have stable housing as a result of this intervention. If we break that down to look at temporary accommodation and sofa surfing at 6 months, we find that they're 6.6 percentage points less likely to be sofa surfing and 7 percentage points less likely to be living in temporary accommodations. That's a really meaningful change to a portion of the young people involved in this trial. Again, as with the other outcome, that reduces slightly over the course of the period, but we're still seeing changes by the end of the study. So this is not being eroded completely. If we look at financial well-being, we actually see the opposite pattern, and people's financial well-being actually increases between the 6 month point and the 12 month point, which suggests that the young people who receive the money, some of them were saving some of it for a rainy day, which allowed them to weather economic shocks or hardship in their life. When we look at health service use, this is where I think there's some of the most interesting findings. At the 6 month point, what we find is that the young people are much more likely, or quite a bit more likely, to have visited a GP or gone to a nurse drop-in center. So they're able to take early support on any health-related challenges. But by the end of the study, they are much less likely to have experienced an overnight stay in hospital. So this is the equivalent of preventing 17 overnight stays in hospital across the 100 young people who were involved in this study. So that's a pretty meaningful change, and I think speaks to the agenda that the government has, and also which I know that Leisure is passionate about, around moving from crisis support towards prevention. If we look at the criminal justice outcomes, we see a reduction in the likelihood that young people are arrested within the first 6 months. That persists to 12 months. We also see reductions at that point in the likelihood of being cautioned or convicted of an offence. This is obviously good for these young people because it means they are less involved in the criminal justice system, but on the basis that people get arrested for things that harm other people, it is also beneficial for the people around them as well. Um, in terms of what people are spending the money on, we don't ask in any great detail, and that's in part because people spend the money differently. If you tell them you're going to ask them how they spent it at the end, I think we would all do that. But the most consistent pattern, and one that I think many people might find surprising, is that we actually see a reduction in spending on alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. When young people are given the financial resources to be able to live a better life, where they're given the financial resources to find, for want of a better word, other forms of fun and entertainment and socialization, they spend less money on these kinds of products. And that's interesting in the context of when I first mooted this study. One of the concerns people raised was, would this lead to young people spending more money on alcohol and drugs in particular? And that doesn't seem to be the case. If anything, we're seeing the opposite. And we have a qualitative research program at the moment that's looking into some of the details of that. So just to very briefly summarize those findings, I appreciate I've just thrown a lot of graphs at you in quite a short space of time. Um, I think one of the most important things we've done is demonstrate that it is possible to run these kinds of studies. We can run decent scale randomized control trials of giving people unconditional cash transfers, and we can produce meaningful results that tell us something about the impact that it's having in people's lives. Even more importantly than that, we see improvements in everything that we're trying to measure: housing, well-being, both financial and people's subjective well-being and their happiness. We see improvements there. We see improvements in their health outcomes, and we see improvements in their criminal justice outcomes. This means that not only are we able to move from a space of preventing adverse things occurring rather than trying to deal with the consequences of them after they occur. It also means that an intervention which tackles poverty and financial hardship at its root has impacts across a wide variety of different outcome measures, whereas interventions that are more targeted at a particular challenge tend to only have effects on those isolated challenges. So that speaks to the breadth of what we're able to use this approach to achieve. Perhaps surprising, perhaps not surprising. Young people, by and large, seem to have spent the money responsibly. We've had, from the qualitative research that we've done alongside this, as well as the quantitative research, there's very little evidence of money being spent in wasteful ways or ways that are harmful to the individual. And I think that reinforces the importance of this approach of unconditional cash transfers, whereby we give people money without any strings attached to it, that people can be trusted when we give them money. And in fact, the act of trusting them might actually help make people be more trustworthy because they respond to trust being placed in them. As Bobby says, this is only the beginning. We've recently inaugurated our cash lab at the at King's, and that is bringing together a number of projects, including several that are funded by the Centre for Homelessness Impact, but which aims to look at all of the different ways in which the state could use, or indeed other actors could use cash conditionally or unconditionally to improve outcomes for a wide variety of people. This is only the first of those to produce results, and I'm very excited about the fact that in the next 18 months or so, we will have the results of several more coming forward. But we also want to move forward with this particular study and think about a larger scale trial, working with more care leavers across more local authorities to find out whether or not we can replicate these results at scale, and crucially, to make sure that we are supporting as many young people as we're able to begin their adult lives in a way that allows them to thrive. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you ever so much for being with us, and thank you to Leisure and the Centre for Homelessness Impact and to the Cabinet Office for having funded what I think 3 years ago looked like quite a risky research project, but which has produced results that we're really very, very proud of. So thank you, everyone.
Great stuff, Michael. Great overview. I'm going to do something which I don't normally do, just to come back to you, Michael, on a kind of technical question before we come to Aaron, just so that it's cleared up in people's minds as we look at this. As Caroline finds, and also Jorg Hubert, we're asking about the error lines on the charts. Can you just give a bit of context there, Michael?
Yes. So those are, as you say, those are 95% confidence intervals. So some of these findings are not what we would call statistically significant at the 5% level. There's a widespread belief among evaluators and in line with the statistical analysis guidance of the Centre for Homelessness Impact that we shouldn't be using 5% as a binary cutoff.
Mm.
In most of these cases, we're talking about an effect that we are either, let's say, 99% or 94% confident, 96% confident that exists, i.e. they are significant 95% level. All of the findings that I've reported, the least confidence we have is around 86% confidence. So that means that we are confident they are in the right direction to the tune of 86%, which taken across all of these different findings, I would say is incredibly positive. Now, obviously, a larger scale study, which is what we're asking for, would allow us to narrow those confidence intervals and to get more precision. But trying to look at statistical significance as a pass fail is not the way that we think we should be looking at data
Great.
these days. I'll stop there because it's quite a technical answer. Sorry.
No, but really helpful, because I think it just will be in people's minds as they saw that. So it's great to clarify that. So now I'm really delighted to welcome Aaron to join the conversation on this, and thanks for coming, Aaron.
You're welcome.
And it'd be great to just hear about your experience, I guess. So first of all, what it felt like to get the cash payment, and what followed from that.
It was very a weird experience, and I think I've said that all the way through. I was asked in the beginning of 2024 to kind of fill out this survey, and I'm not this type of person that kind of does things for the good luck type thing. I throw myself into anything because I'm like, there's the odd chance that this could work out, and then there's the odd chance that it could go badly. And fortunately for me, that did go the right way. And then I had the phone call in July of the same year telling me that I had this money. And prior to even doing the survey, I was saving up for a PC for my university studies, and it meant that I could finally pay for that without having to worry about trying to save money for months on end. So yeah, it was a very lucky experience.
Yeah, brilliant. And so part of the money went towards a PC. Was it other things that you used the money for?
Yeah, I used it was the rest of it wasn't necessarily a used for improving my life in a way. It was more just because I wanted to.
Great.
I went to a concert with my partner. I went to a trip to Liverpool with my partner as well, and the rest of it I think was just getting stuff for me and to look after myself type thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And so, in terms of the impact of it on you, so what sort of difference did it make for you?
Um, the biggest thing was that I could see a deep improvement in my assignments. I mean, I wasn't doing poorly beforehand, but it meant that I could have so much more, like things could be done a lot quicker, and I wasn't waiting for my Google to open up, or it's
Yeah.
laptops are a terrible investment sometimes. And I think definitely assignment work was a lot more efficient, and it was a lot better, and I could work a lot quicker. Yeah, definitely a great investment.
Great. And is there anything about the trial or support more generally for care leavers that you'd want policymakers to understand better, or people that are making decisions around this to understand better?
I think a lot of people don't realise the impact that foster care has. For me, foster care was a very, very bad experience, and I think mental health wise, I was suffering, and social workers weren't supportive. It was more a lot of my mum and my family that were having my back, and I think for people that aren't that fortunate to have their family, I think it's big to have that support there. So I think that probably be one of my biggest things that I would change or start to change, because this money alone could have helped somebody in need, let alone like a little advice, or this is how you can handle being out of care, even if you've been in care for as long as I have or your whole life. You still need that support, and I don't think that's necessarily recognised overall. And I think that's something that needs to change.
Mm. And you're doing your own part in trying to push for that change. You want to
Yeah.
say a little about that?
I've actually made a TikTok account, and I can't remember the name of the TikTok. I might have to get it up in a minute.
That's all right.
But yeah, it's I haven't posted anything on it yet, but I will do. Like I'll share all my articles that I've done, and I'll talk a bit about myself and how autism affected my care experience, because it was a big issue that I had. So it's a lot of care leave, how I was as a care leaver, the cash transfer, how I got to uni and stuff like that. It's going to be a big widespread thing of advocating for those types of people.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of that. And we can definitely put the link, if you find the name, we can put a link in the chat so
Yeah.
that people can follow up on that after this webinar. Thank you so much, Erin. That's great. And I'm sure people will have comments and thoughts for you in the questions at the Q&A section too. So over to you, Leisha.
Thank you, Bobby. And Erin, thank you for sharing your experiences so openly. I think what really stayed with me, both from what you said and from the stories of other participants, is that sense of having a bit of breathing space, of things feeling just a little bit less fragile, a little more manageable. And it's striking how something relatively simple can make that kind of difference at such a critical moment. And this matters because it brings us to a bigger question, a really important question for us at the Center for Homelessness Impact. What happens if we trust people? Because when we first started exploring cash transfers in this space, that question wasn't widely accepted. There was skepticism, there were concerns, and in some cases, a real sense that this simply wouldn't work. And yet we chose to test it because at the Center for Homelessness Impact, part of our role as a What Works Center is not only to test and scale what is already accepted, but to challenge the assumptions that sit underneath our systems, I guess, and to test whether they actually hold, to ask whether some of the things we take for granted are helping or whether they might be getting in the way. And to do that in a way that moves the conversation from opinion to evidence, which is why it's important to work with great partners like King's. And that brings us to care leavers, because if there's a group for whom financial flexibility might matter most, it's young people make the transition out of care. Most young people don't make the transition to adulthood all at once. They move gradually, as it's already been said today. But for many care leavers, that simply isn't there. What this trial did in a very practical way was to provide something many of us rarely have to think about, a small amount of stability at a critical moment. And what stands out is not just what the money was used for, but what it made possible, that sense of having a bit of breathing space, of being able to make decisions without everything feeling urgent or fragile. And this speaks to one of the most important aspects, I think, of cash transfers, the fact that they restore something our systems often take away, agency. Instead of prescribing what support should look like, they allow people to decide what matters most to them. And that matters not just practically, but psychologically. It recognizes dignity, it recognizes capability, and it acknowledges, really importantly, that people are often best placed to understand their own priorities. And I think there's something deeper here for us to reflect on, because when systems become highly rule-driven, they often optimize for compliance rather than outcomes. They become very good at asking, was the process followed, but less good at asking, did this actually help? Cash transfers very much shift that focus. They bring us all back to outcomes, to whether people are more stable, more secure, and better able to navigate their lives. And the results we've seen today suggest that when we create space for that kind of decision making, people use it in ways that support stability and well-being. Importantly, this also comes at a moment, in terms of our context, when the system is under significant pressure. We are seeing record levels of families in temporary accommodation and very stretched local authority budgets. And if we continue to rely only on the approaches we already used, it's difficult to see how we achieve different outcomes. This is also where robust evidence really matters and becomes essential, because it allows us to rigorously test ideas, including ones that might initially feel uncomfortable, like this one, and to learn what actually makes a difference. And to do that in a way that builds confidence over time. So decisions can be made not just with conviction, but with reliable evidence behind them. Obviously, having said all that, it's important to be clear. I'm not claiming that cash transfers are a silver bullet, but what this research suggests is that relatively simple interventions delivered at the right moment can make meaningful effects across several aspects of people's lives. It also points to something broader, that financial insecurity at key life transitions can drive instability in housing and beyond in the short and longer term. And that addressing that directly can be powerful, a real powerful type of prevention. So the question now is not simply whether cash transfers can work, it's how they should be designed, particularly for care leavers, and how financial support might sit alongside rather than replace relationships, services, and housing support. Because if we get the design right, the potential is not just to alleviate short-term pressure, but to support much more stable trajectories into adulthood. And ultimately, this brings us back to the original question. What happens if we trust people? What this trial suggests is that trust, when combined with reliable evidence and thoughtful design, can be a powerful foundation for policy. And for us at the Centre for Homelessness Impact, the next step is clear: to continue to build that evidence with wonderful partners like King's, to test these approaches at greater scale and with greater precision, and in doing so, hopefully to support policymakers to make much better decisions that are grounded not just in assumptions, but on what actually works for whom and where. Because the real opportunity here is not just to understand whether this approach works, but to generate the kind of evidence that allows us to do so with greater confidence. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Leisha. Just that broader context is so important, and it links to lots of our other work where that key points in life, key transitions are so important. And when people don't have the support around them at those points, that's when things typically go wrong. So it's absolutely the case that we can learn from this from many other areas too. Any reflections? I've just come, Michael or Erin, anything on what Leisha said before I come to the questions?
For me, I think it's important that we kind of take note of care leavers and the statistics that we've already got, and use that for future but I can't think of the word, but using that and you have faith that care leavers will use the support in the right way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. Anything, Michael, or I'll come to the questions. Well, I mean, the top upvoted question by some distance is just saying that Erin is inspirational. Well done to her, and good luck for the future, which I think we all hugely agree with. So that's by far the top one that I've got there. Then we do get into some of the kind of more design and broader application questions, I guess. So one from Susan Murray: has there been any comparison with this trial and existing 2000 care leaver payment system in Scotland? Michael or Leisha? I guess.
Do you want to go, Leisha, or me?
There you go.
Yeah, you go, Michael.
Yeah. So not as yet. So there's no. My understanding is that the Scottish have just brought in the £2,000 care leaver payment. We contributed to the consultation that was conducted on that to provide evidence around the use of unconditional cash transfers. But there's no evaluation in place as yet that I know of for the Scottish program. So we obviously are on the back of these findings, very pleased to see what the Scottish government is doing. It's important to remember that the Scottish care system is very different to the English care system. They grew up with completely different legal traditions. So it's interesting to see what happens there versus here, but they are different systems. So we can't necessarily generalize that much, which is a very caveaty answer. But yes, we've seen what they're doing and we're very excited about it.
And this is just being brought in, is it, Michael? Because the question implies it exists, but I guess it's like exists as in it's about to start.
Yeah, so my understanding was the consultation ended at the beginning or middle of 2024, and then it has been announced as happening, but I think it's starting in 2026.
Great. Very good.
Which is obviously now, but
great. And how did we arrive at the 2000 figure? And is there a potential for this to have higher levels in funding permitting?
Yeah. So I think the crucial part of that sentence is funding permitting. So we wanted to find an amount of money that was firstly consistent with other similar trials. So there are other trials that Centre for Homelessness Impact has commissioned, which is using £2,000. So having that point of similarity is helpful. We wanted an amount of money that was um, meaningful, that it can make a meaningful difference in somebody's life. An amount of money, if we're honest, that also didn't trigger the £4,000 in savings rule that affects people's eligibility for universal
Mm.
credit. And we wanted to be able to run a trial that was large enough to produce meaningful results with the amount of money that was available from
Mm.
from funders. So it's sort of a triangulation of a number of different factors. But if the question is also, would we like to do it with more money? Then yes, absolutely. And if anybody has any more money, then we would be delighted to hear about it.
Mm.
Just to echo that, because as Michael will know, ever since all of this started, we've wanted to test at least twice as much as that amount, but it hasn't been possible so far to do so. But certainly something that we're planning to do in the future.
Right. And that would be the sort of aim was double, is sort of to stay under the universal credit threshold, but to have a larger amount for people. Is that the kind of model that you think would be an ideal one to test?
Yes, and or doing larger amounts of money potentially spread over a period of time.
Right, got you. Which actually links very nicely into Julio's question next, which is more for Erin, who says, first, thanks for sharing your experiences. But given the same total amount, would you have preferred monthly payments or a lump sum? Did you have a sort of thought on what would work best?
I think my thing is care leavers need money and they need it then and there.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'd left care a few years after I received the money, but a lot of the time it's given to people that are freshly out of care.
Mm.
And in cases of when they don't have homes to go to, they need that money then and there to get some form of housing, get some, fresh clothes so that they can go to interviews, stuff like that. It's kind of difficult to give that in lump sums when, these things need to happen now and not 3 months down the line, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's a definite case for front loading this because you've got these things that you need to get immediately. Because you did mention sort of spreading it out, Michael. What's your sort of thoughts or leisure on the lump sum versus spread?
I mean, if we say that someone graduates from the workforce into retirement and we absolutely expect them to receive a lump sum and then to have payments staggered over a long period of time, I don't see why the same shouldn't be the same courtesy shouldn't be extended to care leavers.
Yeah. So both is the ideal.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
And it should be people's choice. But, one of the things that always appealed to me about the one-off lump sum is that we know from some of the most powerful examples internationally of these things working that that's all they were. It's the simplicity of it's a single time, and it had really positive impacts, not just in the short term, but longer term as well. So if that's the case, why not keep things simple and trust people? Having said that, I'm all for testing different mechanisms and for giving the choice to young people in this case.
Yeah.
There's also a sort of another type of halfway house where you could give people a larger amount on multiple occasions. So instead of saying we're going to give you £40 a week rather than £2,000 at the beginning of the year, you could give people £2,000 at the beginning of consecutive years, right? So local authorities retain statutory responsibility until 25. You could stagger these sort of larger payments in that kind of way rather than handing them out a few pounds at a time. Now, I also view this as an empirical question, right? We have some evidence of what might work, but we don't know. And so let's find out, right? If we get to the stage where that's genuinely the kind of argument we get to have about what is the best way to be generous and trusting towards young people, then that's a much better conversation to be having than where we were a few years ago, which was should we trust them with money at all?
Definitely. Absolutely. There was a second part to Julia's question, which I think we sort of covered, was how did you determine the amount in relation to what is needed for a care leaver to truly thrive? I guess we worked from the amount of money that we had or we could get, and from other barriers too. But is there any reflections on the kind of quantums that?
So I do agree with Leisha that it would be good to test larger amounts of money. We are constrained by what we're constrained by. Ultimately, if central government were to take an interest in this, then central government could relax their own rules around savings and those kinds of things. So we wouldn't need to try and do this in some ways, kind of in spite of the existing systems. We could do it in harmony with it. And that I think would be an interesting question, not just to think about small trials of things, but how do we change the system? But that's a bigger question and probably not for now.
Yeah, yeah, but definitely for down the line. Okay, so then we got well, let's actually jump to that question because it's sort of this is more about a system question, Ben Orgal's question. Did the study interface with the participants' care leaver support, or was it wholly separate? Were personal advisors involved by the researchers? Is this kind of just this intervention? And then I think maybe a broader view on how it should integrate into more of a system of help.
Yeah, so we work closely with the 9 local authorities to involve the young people in the study. So we don't have direct contact with young people in our day-to-day lives as a university. So we have to work with local authorities. That's absolutely the right thing to do. All personal advisors were briefed about in the local authorities were briefed about the study. If one of their young people was involved in either the treatment group or the control group, they were told, and they were told which group they were in. That meant that they were able to potentially provide advice about what one might spend the money on. But it was really important to drill home to people that this is unconditional. It's the young people's money for them to spend as they wish. And if they were to want to spend it on something daft, which, as I say, relatively few of them did, it's their money with which to do that. We were very clear with local authorities, and I think this was adhered to based on the data we captured from local authorities. They were not to withdraw any other kind of support from young people because they have received this money, and we don't see any evidence of that at all. But this is we run this as though it is something that the local authority is offering. It just happens to be being the money comes from an account labeled King's College London rather than Birmingham Children's Trust, because that, from a policy perspective, is the way it would be done if it was done, quote unquote, in real life, right? If this was scaled up, that would be the natural mechanism for government to use because local authorities already have contact and relationships with these young people.
Yeah, very good. Lisa, yeah, you.
There's just different points of the pathway, I guess, that you could use, bearing that in mind. Obviously, for this particular trial, we used, any referrals that were, from young people aged 18 to 25, but you could actually zoom in on different types of care levers, for instance, and really deploy different amounts, in a more deliberate way. So those are when we talk about being more deliberate and experimenting with different points in the pathway, those are the types of things that we're referring to. And I think that's what's critical to improving the granularity of our understanding, really. And what's dangerous about just scaling these things without understanding how they work for whom, because over time, as things become less fashionable, suddenly there could be a backlash. Well, if you're actually every step of the way gathering the evidence and the value for money of different models, it means that you're building something that lasts and you're scaling responsibly.
Great.
Yeah, just to say I completely agree with Leisure about that. One of the, I think, big lessons for those of us who care about what works in evaluation comes from Sure Start, where the big evaluation that proved it was enormously good value for money didn't arrive until several years after it had been cancelled for not being good value for money. Right? Yes. We need to buttress these approaches every step of the way with robust evidence.
Yeah, that's such a good example. It's such a tragedy that was behind that curve. And so from Luke Ravenscroft, we've got conditional versus unconditional. In the international development literature, conditions typically hurt the most marginalized. Has there been a similar conditional study, or I suppose generally, do we have insight onto why unconditional helps? And that goes to some of the big points Leisure was bringing in about agency. But any other thoughts?
To I do think that the agency piece is really important. I think what we've seen across a number of these studies is when you try and restrict someone's agency and imply that you don't trust them, then they start behaving in a way that is untrustworthy. And so that is in our gift. I also think that for young people leaving care who may not have had a lot of agency in their life, but also other groups as well, like giving them that agency is really important, not just if it leads to better outcomes, but just morally speaking. I think it's also worth coming back to that point about how did we pick the amount of money, and that also speaks to the unconditionality piece, by which I mean if we'd imposed conditions, so if we said Erin has to, get at least a 2-1 on her essays in order to get the money, or she has to do this, or she has to do that, or she's only allowed to spend it on these things, we would have spent half the budget just checking that Erin was doing what
Mm.
we expected her to do, right? By doing it in this way, we are able to put more money directly into the hands of more care leavers without having to set up a system around it. And that system costs money. And we often don't think about that, right? If you think about the debates about public spending on welfare, it's how can we give people less money and impose more conditionality rather than how can we reduce the amount of conditionality and give people more money or even the same money.
Mhm. More efficiently. Yeah.
Exactly right.
So it would be great to get your thoughts on this, Aaron, as the fact that this was given without any restrictions and how that made you think about it.
I think it helped because I didn't need to directly use it on anything.
Mm.
Like obviously, I had a thought of buying the PC anyway,
Yeah.
but it meant that I didn't have to follow any guidelines, which
Mm.
like money is one of those things. It's like you need to buy food, you need to buy clothes, you need to this and this. Whereas this money was literally just use this however you want,
Yeah.
and it felt, especially at the age I was, it gave me a lot of freedom and a lot of, I was 21 and it was a case of I had this lot of money and I can do whatever I want, and it
Mm.
did make me feel a little more older, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it felt like I was actually independent and
Yeah.
I could choose what I wanted to do, which I hadn't really done before.
Mm.
So it did give me a little sense of independence with that money.
Amazing.
And to be clear, certainly we think there is probably space for both. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's space for both, which is why we're interested in testing all types of financial assistance. But I think the default should be unconditional. And then if there's a good reason why people need additional support to make use of the money, then the support should be there. So what's critical, again, is just to test different types of mechanism as much
Mm.
as possible and tailoring it as much as possible to people's desires, really, and personal circumstances.
Yeah. And ultimately what works is so it's kind of yes, this is there's no one answer to these types of complex issues, and it needs to adapt. Absolutely. So, on that kind of theme of future, what are the future plans to influence government and other policymakers using this gold standard of evidence, which it really is? Um, any reflections? We want to do more testing, clearly, um, and I guess more convening around the designs and making sure people know about it. It was very, we have a lot of media engagement for our work, and we put a lot of effort into that. But that's not just to get media hits; it is actually to draw people towards us and get it talked about as an issue by decision makers, not just the public, and get pressure on it. But I guess Michael Leisure, the plans are just to do more and keep making a noise about it. Michael, Michael, you can go.
Okay. So as I said, we really want to run more studies like this. This means a larger study with care leavers. That's really important, not just because of the research, but because it allows us to help potentially benefit more people. That has to be our North Star. We are here not for publications. We are here to make the world a better place. Um, but also studies with other groups who might benefit from unconditional cash transfers and who are overlooked. As Erin said, care leavers often are, but there are others who are overlooked too. Um, we want to see policy change, right? We want to see this become the kind of thing that exists nationally, but we need to do that in a sensible way that is building that robust evidence base as we go. And at the risk of sounding a bit like a broken record, we can't do that without money. So funding for us is the sort of the key next step to get, and partnership with more local authorities to ensure this can go forward.
Anything to add, Lee?
And one of the things that's groundbreaking about this particular project is the fact that it was the Cabinet Office that enabled it to happen, because many of our other projects in this space, the money comes from philanthropy. So that in itself is really meaningful. And I do hope this means that the top recommendation in the report, which is we need to do something like this, but bigger and ideally with different types of amounts as well, should be able to come about in the not too distant future. One of the things I'd also love would be to do this in the other nations, and obviously in Scotland it's already been mentioned, there's fertile ground for these types of approaches. But the next challenge is making sure that they come hand in hand with reliable evidence, robust testing. So that's very much my hope and ambition. And like I said, this is part of a bigger program of work for us on financial assistance models. So I would just urge people to continue to think about that in relation to service provision, I guess, and what's the right mix of both, and how can we make sure that we put that at the forefront of support when it comes to groups like this, as opposed to thinking that services should always be the default.
Excellent. Great stuff. We're doing really well on these questions. We're getting through them, which is great, because it's got a couple now that are a bit more about the design. So John Penrose, one of our visiting professors, says Erin mentioned that she completed a survey before the study began. What criteria were used to select participants before randomized allocation, or what was the purpose of the survey strand?
Boringly, the purpose of it is statistical power. So by measuring people's outcomes at the start, we're able to be more precise in our understanding of the impacts over time. So in order to be eligible, young people had to be care leavers still in contact with their local authority, and the local authority was allowed to make a judgment about safeguarding risk, i.e., where they were very concerned that giving somebody £2,000 would lead them to very soon come to significant harm. They were allowed to not invite them to participate in the study. But once they were invited, as Erin was, and they complete the survey. The survey itself is not a tool for sifting or sorting. Everybody who completed that survey had exactly the same chance as everybody else of getting the money. It was completely random at that point.
Got you. So yeah, so this is just a pre-measure rather than a selection measure. That's useful to know. And what are as staying on that kind of technical element, what are the notable differences between findings from the 6-month mark and the 1-year mark? And how much can we disaggregate differences between early effects and longer term effects of one-off interventions?
Yeah, so that's something we'd really like to look at more in a bigger, longer term study. So being able to say, are the differences between 6 months and 12 months being driven by real change? So particularly the housing findings, the size of those diminishes by about 50% between 6 months and 12 months. Now, that's an imprecisely estimated decline, so it could be that they're exactly the same, but we're just measuring that. We're not capturing that in the data as well. So a larger study would enable us to tell what those longer term effects are with more precision. Most of the effects, unfortunately, the housing effects do decline. Most of the effects are around financial well-being, around criminal justice outcomes, around health outcomes. We see bigger effects after the 12 months than we do after the 6 months, which suggests that the dynamics of the effects might be different between different outcomes, but we're not set up in this study to be able to answer those questions in the incredibly granular way that you'd want to be able to. So what I'm saying should be taken with a bit of a caveat.
And do we have any sort of rough hypothesis why the housing effects may decay quicker? Is it just because housing's so expensive and difficult to
I mean,
sustain?
it could be that housing is so expensive. It could be that if you're systematically falling behind on your rent, then money allows you to overcome that for a period of time. But once the money is gone, it's gone. Um, that doesn't gel completely with the financial well-being data showing an improvement after 12 months relative to the 6-month point. So I'm not completely confident of that, but that would be my instinct. But obviously others have more expertise than I do.
Hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask Aaron whether, the sort of longevity, how long the effect lasts, whether you had reflections on, does it sort of, you get that nice boost, but then it kind of fades away, or how does it feel?
I think it's kind of. I mean, I still talk about it now, how much of an impact it had on me. So I think the money itself is a little of a short period of time of like boost in your mood, but then I think you think back a few years later and like this money really helped me, and you know what, it was I may have used it in like a month, but at the end of the day it made me and my life better, and that's the kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you keep hold of that boost, that sort of personal boost for longer, I guess, as well as the practical effects. Yeah.
It's no silver bullet, but we do know there's a correlation from the international evidence between the size of the grant and the catalytic effect it can play, essentially, which is
Yeah.
no surprise, which again explains why we're so keen to test bigger amounts at the same time as not underestimating the impact that a small grant can make, which is personally what I found so surprising. I didn't expect the positive impacts to be this positive, given we're talking about a relatively small amount of money. And that surprised me. So I think there's definitely something here that's really powerful, but we just need to be realistic about what's possible in the longer term with this type of grant.
Of course. I'm going to try and I'm going to sort of just try to get through a couple more really good sort of practical questions, because this is a really good way to share this with a community of people interested in these types of trials. But then I'll come back to the panel at the end for just any final reflections, just to put you on notice that we'll have a couple of minutes at the end. But let's see if we can get through a couple of these more practical points. So Rosalie Warnock, can I ask how you managed to work around universal credit restrictions more broadly? So the cash transfer wasn't viewed as income, change participants, universal credit payments, etc.
Yeah, so we're working with local authorities to do this, and local authorities have mechanisms under the Children Act which allow them to support young people when they're under their care, which includes between the age of 18 and 25, and families in need financially in a way that doesn't affect universal credit or legacy benefits or get treated as income by HMRC. That's a feature of the legislation, both establishing children's services in this country in 1989, but also subsequent benefit legislation. And that's partly why obviously the deservingness is a key feature of why we work with care leavers, but so too is the fact that there exists this legal mechanism for local authorities to provide support. And so we are providing support on their behalf in this case.
Yeah, very good. And sort of a welfare and employment one, maybe if we run these together as a final couple. So were any stats collected on impacts on welfare spending or other government expenditure on young people to get a sense of the overall value for money of this, I guess? And then the lack of impact on employment is an important finding. DWP policy is based on a perception that rational cost benefit considerations drive people's employment decisions behavior, but evidence shows that's rarely the case, much more complex mix of factors. So first look and feel, this may feel disappointing not to find an employment effect. It's still very important information for supporting young people, the support that young people need beyond cash. So it's kind of that, it's an observation on, it is really difficult to shift those employment outcomes through these types of interventions. So welfare and work, any reflections on those two strands?
Yeah, so we don't see changes in employment status, and I think that I'm not negative about that at all, right? So everything I've been told as an economist tells me if you give people some free money, they should work less. And there's a sort of a beautiful symmetry in this to me because my favorite paper in all of microeconomics, and possibly the reason why many of us are here, is David Card and Alan Kruger's paper on the minimum wage in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, which found that, contrary to what economists thought, minimum wages did not drive unemployment, right?
Mm.
So that led to a radical change 5 years later when the British government adopted the existence of a minimum wage, which was in part based on that evidence from the United States. The fact that we don't see employment decline, which is what has been shown in some other studies like this, particularly the basic income kind of studies where you give people money month after month after month, is it's a very positive thing from my perspective. So I'm not disappointed by that. I'm delighted.
Mhm.
On the welfare side, we don't measure that. The fact that we don't see changes in employment status or education status suggests that probably there isn't a rise in welfare spending. And in the longer term, we will be looking to use the longitudinal educational outcomes data set to follow up and look at employment and income using administrative data, which is why we haven't prioritized those outcome measures in the surveys that we're looking at the moment. But we need to wait for government to publish those data sets, and we're not there yet.
Right.
I mean, we're very interested in employment outcomes. And to be honest, I'd definitely be careful in terms of interpreting the results. This is one of the reasons why we need to continue to scale and test this particular intervention, and to follow the same cohort over longer period of times would be ideal too, because the outcomes can obviously change. But one of the reasons why we were so interested in this type of intervention is precisely because we know that a one-off cash transfer can actually improve dramatically employment outcomes, not just in the short term, but in the medium to longer term. And relatively modest amounts of money, like $6,000, meant that these kids, this is an example in North America, they had much better jobs that paid better, a few years, 7 or 8 years down the line.
Right.
So we're very, very interested in those types of outcomes. Why? Because they're critical to breaking the link, when it comes to intergenerational homelessness in particular. So employment is not just good for well-being and the economy, it's also good for life chances. And certainly one of the reasons why we want to test bigger amounts. And like Michael said, the fact that it didn't get worse in itself tells you something, but I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from the fact there was no positive effect at this point in time.
Very good. Great answer. So I am just going to, I was just going to read out, I think you answered his question, so it disappeared. Oh yeah, that's right. You did, Michael. Michael Bennett's finally, I'm just going to come round the panel in reverse order. So, Ligia, Aaron, Michael, just for any final sum up thoughts. But before, it was good to see that comment from Michael Bennett. Agency and dignity, returning trust with trust, people over process, backed up by what seems to be a sound test. Temporary accommodation health outcomes alone could be impactful if replicated at scale. How refreshing, thanks all. I think that's a great summary from Michael of what I've taken from this too. So any final reflections first, Leisure, on the whole study? What's next?
Just to say thank you to Erin, to Kings for being part of this journey. For us, like I said, this is very much part of the whole public service reform agenda, and finding mechanisms to bring dignity and agency back into the systems that we've developed, because we know they're really critical to really improving outcomes at societal level. So if you're interested in learning more and helping, please get in touch, and we look forward to working with you on this.
Thank you. Aaron, anything to add at the end?
I think this kind of study has improved many lives, and not just mine. And like I said previously, hopefully this TikTok that I have made will also help. I also found the account name. It's called hang on, let me get it up again. I do apologise.
No worries.
It's where my phone's so slow now. It's called Step Towards Change, and
Very good.
there will be a video I did for BBC coming out either today or tomorrow. I'll obviously be hosting videos of, you know, what it was like to be in care and stuff like that, and especially how much this care, this cash transfer has helped me. So I think, you know, yeah.
Awesome. That's brilliant. Yeah, we will look that up and we'll pass that on to people as well to remind them when we send our emails out on this. Thank you, Aaron, very much. Michael, final thought.
Yeah, just to say thank you to everybody who's been involved in making this happen, participants, local authorities, Leisure, CHI, and Cabinet Office. And to say this is, as I said, this is only the beginning. As we've come across in this, there's so much more work to be done, so many more questions to be answered. But I think this puts us off to a really good start in that direction. And I'm really looking forward to spending the next 10 years working on it.
Brilliant. So you've thanked everyone. It's only for me really to thank everyone for coming today and for a brilliant panel. Really excellent discussion. Thank you all. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.